The last few years have seen breakneck growth in the parcel delivery space. However, there are some partial storm clouds brewing on the horizon this year for both shippers and carriers alike. Welcome to this episode of Better Yet, Fireside Chats with innovators, visionaries, and leaders. My name is Dan Ptak, and I'm filling in for Denise in this episode. I'm thrilled. I'm joined with two gentlemen who are exactly that. I've got Nate Skiver of LPF Spend Management and Josh Fredman, Senior Vice President of Growth and Operations over at Better Trucks. Welcome, gentlemen. Before we dive in, I'd love for you each to just give a brief overview of your organizations and introduce yourself. Nate?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Name is Nate Skiver. I'm founder of LPF Spend Management. And really the focus of my consulting services is to help package shippers negotiate better contracts, but also find the right carriers and services that align to their shipping strategy. I know it's kind of in a nutshell what I help a lot of package shippers with. Prior to that, though, I was in retail for 17 years. So I was a customer of carriers for quite a long time, and I tried to use that kind of point of view from the retailer side to provide solutions with clients.
All right. Hey, Nate, great to be with you. My name is Josh Fredman, as Dan mentioned, SVP of Better Trucks, last mile parcel provider. We're currently in about 21 metros in 14 states, growing quite a bit. We have a completely connected network between each of the metros that we serve. We do a lot of first mile work for our clients. And additionally, we do some middle mile freight work as well for those same clients. And it's great to be with you, Nate, and excited for everything we're going to discuss today.
Awesome. Thank you to both. All right, let's start here. The multi-carrier movement, arguably there's been nothing bigger in the last 5 to 10 years in the parcel space than this movement, thanks to a combination of technology, APIs, aggregators, and the rise of regional carriers like Better Trucks. So Nate, we're going to start with you. When you think of the multi-carrier movement and the rise of regional carriers, how have you seen this movement reshape the parcel delivery landscape?
Yeah, it's been interesting, and you mentioned the last 5 to 10 years, and so yes, it's not a completely new concept at all. But I think pre-pandemic, 3-5 years ago, there have been regional carriers in the market for quite a while. There's more awareness, a little bit more of kind of exploration of those carriers. But like a lot of things in 2020 and 2021, that was accelerated because of the volume growth. And so where before, say, 2020, a lot of retailers were lightly exploring. They were thinking about multi-carrier or regional carriers as a nice to have sometimes instead of a must have. And they had to shift, some of them did, to that must have mindset because of the well-documented issues with carrier capacity. Also then, I think, just exacerbated by not just UPS and FedEx, but they kind of led the charge on escalating rates. And so those two things really drove, I think, a lot of activity out of necessity in 2020, 2021, and it created a need for a lot of retailers to explore regional carriers. It also, for those who didn't explore regional carriers, at the very least, it increased awareness in the market of the value that regional carriers can provide. And so I think that's helped drive a lot more retailers to be more proactive, take more control of their parcel program, which often now includes regional carriers and some of other alternative carriers, instead of relying on only UPS and FedEx. And so I think it's helped to kind of push that mindset shift toward a multi-carrier approach. I think there's still a lot of opportunity there, but we're well on the way, I think, to a lot of progress, though.
Hey, Nate, maybe I could add one thing there. I think you're right on, and I'd love for your thoughts here. But over the last, call it decade, 2 decades, a lot of shippers no longer fulfill out of, one or two massive facilities, and instead the product lies a lot closer to the end client. And I think that's helped shippers, take an initial chance on using regional carriers like us, because the product is not flowing as far. And there are other opportunities to kind of diversify their carrier mix at the same time. So I think what you said is spot on. The only thing I would say is, there's also a lot more kind of fulfillment going on throughout the country, which helps shippers give volume to folks like us. So
yeah, so I think it's a great point. It not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, certainly really large retailers, inventory is decentralized to an extent. It's more distributed, and that just inherently creates more access to, like you mentioned, Josh, more access to regional carrier networks. And whether it's one like Better Trucks, which has integration within their network already, some don't. Some regional carriers don't. So in many cases, it's one or both, that more retailers have that opportunity now. I think that they're shipping from more locations, and that inventory is focused, usually, not always, in a market or region, which plays really well into, I think, the value that regionals can provide.
Often in this scenario, when smaller kind of upstarts start taking share in an industry, you see a lot of innovation in customer experience or technology. Nate, has that been your experience kind of in this industry as regional carriers have started to take on a larger share of the parcel volume?
Yeah, I think so, to an extent. There's a couple of areas. So one, kind of like we talked about, that regional carriers aren't new. Multi-carrier shipping solutions as well, not a new concept to enable a retailer to use multiple carriers to produce labels, basic functionality around rate shopping, maybe selecting the least cost service. But I think the capabilities with those solutions has evolved in the last several years, but then also the value of those solutions has grown because of the growth and the fact that more regional carriers, alternative carriers, are more prominent in the market. And so these solutions can enable many, a portfolio of carriers relatively quickly with retailers. And so again, that increases the access, the ability for a retailer to be very specific about the partners they work with, and not have to go through a long technical IT project. Now, that said, there's still a lot of progress, I think, I'll just say, probably on the retailer side in that regard, because I think multi-carrier shipping solutions, even though there are more of them now, higher quality, better capabilities, in my opinion, technology can still be a barrier sometimes to, on the retailer side, to enable some of these regional carriers, because they don't have maybe the solution in place. So I think there's been a lot of value that's been driven through these solutions. I think there's still some upside because, to an extent, still somewhat underutilized.
Hey, Nate, I have a question there. So how do you advise clients that may be having some of those technology barriers in place? And how can the work that you do, or what do you propose to them in order to kind of circumvent those challenges?
It's a difficult one, because it is definitely highly situational by retailer. I would say part of it depends on the point of view already that retailer has on shipping and delivery, and its kind of role and place in the customer experience. So if it's only trying to justify a technical project with cost savings, that can happen sometimes, enabling other carriers so you can presumably reduce cost by moving volume to them. But if that's the only way that you're going to get a project justified, I know it's been a while, I've lived that, it doesn't always happen. And so being able to, I think, position things to where there are other benefits of enabling multi-carrier, regional carriers. If it's more consistent service, more reliable, faster, presumably some increased CSAT or customer experience benefit there. It's a little difficult sometimes to quantify that, but that has to be part of the discussion, because if it's only cost, then you've got one option. If the math doesn't work, then your project doesn't get approved, or if it does, it's a lower priority. So that's, I think, one way. The other one is, at times, if most carriers, Josh, obviously you know this, are have open APIs, they can integrate directly if needed. So that sometimes can be a path. That can be a sticking point on the retailer side too, but that's obviously one to go through as well, which is lower effort, presumably, of course, than implementing a full-on multi-carrier shipping solution.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think that from our side, we do face some of those challenges sometimes with clients, and we do whatever we can on our side to kind of break through those challenges, if you will. I also think that there's certain technology that we can build internally to help those clients, and I think that makes a big difference as well.
Yep.
Awesome. Nate, you mentioned technology. It can be both a great enabler and a potential barrier. So what are you seeing as some themes emerge technologically in 2023, or as you have various conversations with retailers? Are you seeing any themes come out, whether it be use of a new technology, underutilization of a technology that potentially holds a lot of promise, but for one reason or another isn't being adopted?
Yeah, I think one challenge, and it's not just specific to large omni-channel retailers, but those are the ones who some of them still are challenged by this, is Josh mentioned earlier, we talked a little bit about, say, distributed inventory. So having inventory, whether it's across hundreds of stores and some fulfillment centers, is having that well placed close to demand, so close to where digital orders will be fulfilled and delivered. That's still something that's a big sticking point. And at I think it's the highest level, that's something that if it's solved to an extent for some retailers, can provide tremendous benefits of increasing delivery speed, reducing expense as well. But even on a smaller scale, there's benefit to, if the inventory is already distributed to an extent. Stores, fulfillment centers is a huge missed opportunity, I think, is not surfacing and providing very clear, precise estimated delivery dates to customers, when they're browsing. Fast delivery, even if you could offer it for low cost or free, doesn't really have that much value if the customer doesn't know it while she's trying to make a purchasing decision. So I think that's one where the technology is there on the provider side. A lot of times there's a little bit of challenge on the retailer side of having the ability to know where their inventory is and where they're going to ship it from. So if that's solved, that opens up, I think, a lot of value for some of the regional carrier services that are faster, final mile, things like that. So I think that's one where there's still a lot of opportunity that just hasn't been really taken advantage of yet.
Just in the technology side from the carrier space, I think that, Amazon does a really good job of making sure that a package is delivered where it's supposed to be. And I think that they communicate that really well, either through their portal or text messaging they used to do. I don't know if they still do it. I think that, from a Better Truck standpoint, we've seen that. We think there's a lot of opportunity to improve the delivery experience to the client. So whether that's texting, like, you would get a text or a notice, a message from, Uber or DoorDash when an order is on the way, we have that same technology. We know exactly where the package was dropped based on coordinates that we receive from the driver's phone. And I don't think the national carriers are doing that today. Some are starting to take pictures of deliveries. We've been doing that since the beginning, and I think that makes a big difference in terms of buying adaptation into using regional carriers. And I think that is a true differentiator that we're continuing to push on and to show where we can make a big difference in terms of driving quality in terms of deliveries. So that's the only technology piece I would add there.
Yeah, that actually, Josh, I'll kind of finish that too. It's a good point, because it's actually one that kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about justifying, say, a technology project and showing the benefit. Something that's kind of a soft benefit like that, or it's not always top of mind. Certainly not for, I guess, the logistics or supply chain or transportation teams, if those are the ones who are kind of lobbying for getting some work done internally. That's why it's really important to have really the right stakeholders, be it on the customer experience side as well, involved in at least the discussion, if not the decision, because that type of thing with real-time tracking, text, like the customer interaction, that isn't something for a lot of, I think, retailers probably that's top of mind, that is a necessity. But if they know it's there and that the value that it provides is different than what they have with most of their current carriers, I think that can help the business case to an extent too.
Yeah, and I think they can take that and improve the entire kind of order journey or package journey, not only from the delivery, not only from when the time the package leaves the warehouse to the time it arrives at a customer's doorstep. It's the packing, the pick packing of that shipment too. There's lost time in the time that a package is ordered from the time it's put in a box and wrapped up and a label put on the box. And so I think that to the extent across the industry, if we can create additional transparency and provide more information, that's a win for everybody.
Let's shift topics. We alluded to some potential storm clouds brewing in the space in 2023. Let's talk about the potential UPS strike. So as of recording of this episode, in Washington, D.C., UPS kicked off negotiations with its union. Interestingly enough, we discussed this. The UPS is actually the largest private sector union contract in North America. So this obviously has massive ramifications, not only for this space, but for all of kind of organized labor throughout the United States. The CEO said of UPS that he wants to get a deal done. He wants to do it before July 31st. There's only been one strike in the history of UPS's 100-year history, and that was 1997. But also the rhetoric, it feels a little different this year heading into these negotiations. So I'd love to get both your takes, whether there's a strike or not. I think everyone in the industry is got to have contingency plans, or is baking this into the conversations that they're having with everyone. So Nate, what's your read on this situation, kind of sitting here in mid-April of this situation?
Yeah, it's something that it's difficult. So I've been in this situation on the retailer side 5 years ago. And there's definitely some things I think that are probably different this time around, but it's definitely not a clear-cut, say, decision or even what's considered. It's highly situational. So just a couple of examples. If a retailer already has several carriers in place, let's just say UPS is their primary majority of the volume, but also a lightweight package carrier and maybe one or two regionals, presumably they've got the ability, technology and otherwise, to add more carriers if they need to, or move some volume from UPS to existing carriers. Those are the ones I think that are obviously in a better position and should be, or should have probably already had that plan developed months ago, and it should be time bound. If you're within X number of days and there isn't an imminent agreement here, then go ahead and execute those negotiations that they probably have already had or are now with other carriers. But at the same time, you're not, as a shipper, considering moving all of your volume 3 months before an agreement might expire. So there's definitely a balance there. But if you're single source with UPS, it's really an entirely different discussion. You certainly, I mean, I can't think of a scenario necessarily where I would advise a company to move all the volume just because of the potential strike. But there's also a higher degree of risk for that company. And so that, to me, actually is the risk of this type of event in the market, which would have a huge impact, really should force those types of companies to rethink their overall approach to carrier sourcing, to the partners they have. And granted, they don't have a lot of time to make changes, but that needs to happen now to determine, what's our risk? Are we able to add carriers? Can we move volume? If so, then when are we going to, implement that solution? Last thing I would say is that, existing customers of UPS, they should be already talking with UPS about this potential issue first. They're probably going to hear a lot of positive things directly from UPS, but there's a couple things that some customers might be able to do from an agreement standpoint. Won't get into a lot of detail, but there can be some concessions negotiated potentially. There are also agreement terms that some customers can get a waiver or something like that in place for a period of time on revenue commitments. That I wouldn't recommend as a first point to try to negotiate with UPS, but have to really cover all the bases, and that's one of them.
Yeah, Nate, I think your thoughts on business continuity are really valid, because I think even outside this industry, all companies should have a business continuity plan, right? And that means single source or moving away from single source. I mean, that's really important. I will tell you, from my vantage point, or from the Better Trucks vantage point, there already has been some damage done because some exclusive UPS shippers or other shippers in general have reached out that we had not talked with previously and said, hey, we're looking at mitigation efforts. We're looking into using Better Trucks because we don't know what's going to happen with UPS. And even if there is no strike, we want to start the exploratory conversation. And from our standpoint, that's great. That's a foot in the door, and we think that in some regard, that's because of the news of a potential strike.
Yeah, it's a good point. Definitely the I guess threat of a potential strike, it absolutely creates opportunity for engagement. Like that's absolutely is happening. The interesting part, I think, just thinking, and Josh, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but from a just say an alternative carrier standpoint, is then you're not going to turn away opportunities. You want to have the conversation, you want to explore, but then being able to determine if we actually finally have some action from some retailers, is just making sure that that's really a benefit on the carrier side, that it's not transient kind of volume that's just going to go away. And it's challenging, but I think if or when some of that volume does get moved, those UPS customers should see the value from those other providers. And I think that's probably the way that volume that's created, I guess, out of this opportunity can be sustained, because there's a long list of challenges in competing with UPS or FedEx, actually, particularly on the rates and the contract side. So just on that alone, it's really, really challenging for other carriers to win and retain volume. But I think it's got to be the service and the value proposition. It's well executed. That's something that can sustain.
Great.
Nate, it sounds like this could go well kind of into the summer. is there anything as you kind of follow along, as you keep an eye on these negotiations in particular that you're looking or listening for from either side?
You know, it's really difficult from a, I guess, public narrative standpoint, because to really discern anything specific out of there to
Yeah.
be able to act upon, because you're going to have, and we have so far, have UPS. They're not going to say much, but they probably, I guess they probably shouldn't. Not details on the negotiations, but they're very confident, of course, publicly, that a new agreement will be in place, and they've stated well in advance of the expiration of the current one. I'm sure they're also communicating that to most customers as well. And on the Teamster side, they're going to be generally as loud and vocal as they can publicly to not just voice their concerns, but to really kind of try to get some attention on the issues, and really create concern on UPS's side that would be to the Teamsters' benefit during the negotiations. But it's really hard, I'll just say, Dan, to pick out, I think, things just on the commentary or the narrative. That said, I mean, just as the days fly off the calendar here, that would be the thing I think that would start to really raise the level of concern from the market in general, but certainly the UPS customers.
Absolutely. Let's move over kind of the flip side, the other half of our duopoly, FedEx, this month. So a lot of news this month. They announced some of the biggest restructuring efforts in their 50-year history. Again, depending on who you talk to, what analysts you talk to, some feel like there could be some significant changes on the table, from warehousing and operations to drivers, and some say it's a lot of the same status quo. I guess I want to hear both your takes on this. But again, Nate, let me start with you. Was there one thing or anything in particular that kind of struck you from this announcement from FedEx this month, that their restructuring efforts?
I don't think there's necessarily one thing that stuck out, but it's something that I guess some people would probably say it's overdue. I mean, just from a network consolidation standpoint. Now it's hard to say that, because they've had these separate networks for decades, and now it is just a massive undertaking to consolidate the networks. And you mentioned drivers, like there's different classification of the drivers of ground and then the FedEx employees as well, or excuse me, the Express. There is a tremendous amount of physical work that will be involved in the restructuring. There is potential with on the labor front of efforts to unionize, and it's a reorganization as well. So it's not just the network; it is operating companies really that are being combined, and that includes personnel. So that, to me, I think it's just the scope and the scale of all of those changes, and at least the network part of it was stated as being a target of June of next year, June of 24, to be completed. And I don't know, complete is there's how much finality there is to that. I can't imagine that entire change network transformation will be complete then. So I think really there's a lot of more questions than answers. What I think is particularly on the timeline, either the timeline moves out, and or if it doesn't move out, I guess there's probably a higher risk of service issues, just kind of call them growing pains along the way. And that's got to be a concern for FedEx customers. But it's all kind of speculative at this point. We don't really know until it starts to take hold. But that's the thing. I think those changes are very large changes. They're not simple. And I think service is probably the risk that I would see for FedEx customers or prospective customers who may be considering working with FedEx.
Yeah, I mean, Nate, I think you're right. I think that maybe your comment about it being overdue, I would tend to agree with. I'm no, expert there, but I will say a lot of companies in the transportation realm have gone through large scale integrations, mergers, whatever it is that you want to refer to it as, and they've been successful. And so maybe the timeline here is a little ambitious, but from my standpoint, it can definitely be done, and I think it'll, at the end of the day, it'll probably be a win for the client, for the customer, and that's my hope for the industry. So.
Josh, we talked about maybe regional carriers. This is potentially an impact in an area where regional carriers have had an impact. Josh, when you think of maybe like Better Trucks, when you think of a slightly lighter footprint, warehouses more strategically placed, closer to metropolitans, to your point earlier about putting goods closer to the customer. Do you think a lot of those changes that, are kind of hallmarks of regionals have, forced FedEx to maybe rethink some of their decades old kind of network design?
Absolutely, hands down. And I think that, a lot of what I think FedEx is trying to shed here is, having multiple facilities or multiple trucks for, doing the same thing and going to the same areas that a lot of that they're in every day. And so instead of having, two trucks in the same neighborhood, they'll have one truck. And, that makes a lot of sense. And really that's predicated, I would assume by, the influx of choices that shippers have. And so, to answer your question, Dan, none of this really surprises me.
So I agree as well. I think there's, with more competition, some things we've already talked about, more options, more technology to enable them, certainly part of it as well. But then also, and this isn't just FedEx, you could say UPS, and then regionals being in the market too, is that ground service is a lot faster than it was years ago. That decreases the need for all the heavy amount of infrastructure on the express or air side for FedEx, which then really drives the need to take out redundancies from the network. That's been there all along, but as there's more value, I guess, out of a ground product, then you really have to examine the express network and try to reduce the operating cost out of that network. And to Josh's point, there's also on the pickup as well, but at the delivery side of having multiple drivers and assets, trailers and trucks, sometimes running almost not the same route, but being in the same area pretty much at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think so from that standpoint, really, I don't know how much FedEx had to do this at some point. And I think it's just been accelerated with some of the market changes in the last few years.
Yep. I think it's a great point, Nate.
Let me ask you about this. When you think of like uniformity versus flexibility, I think it's sometimes difficult when you have traditional carriers at the scope and the size they are. Uniformity becomes a necessity. Josh, when I think of, for instance, like pickup times, I think retailers and e-commerce firms have had to do logistical gymnastics over the last few years to adapt to lifestyle changes in the pandemic. And that's also, I think, forced them to rethink what they're asking for the carriers. Maybe it's a later pickup, or maybe it's a different scenario in which they're direct injecting into the network. So maybe Josh, we'll start with you. I'm curious as to, like, as you've seen conversations evolve over the last few years, are you seeing retailers and e-commerce firms ask for more flexibility in how they engage with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they absolutely have asked for different things, and from a Better Truck standpoint, we try to accommodate those. And so, a lot of that has to do with where we pick up. It may not be a distribution center. It may be a retail location. It may be picking up at a storefront where a bunch of packages have been dropped off by a truck going through a metro. And so, from my standpoint, or from the Better Truck standpoint, it doesn't matter where we take the package. It's still the same work that we're being done, which is getting a package to a client. And so, however form that takes place or whatever technology we use to make sure that that is trackable and that we're providing the transparency along the way, we're happy to try and accommodate to, whatever makes the most sense to, get the customer their package fastest and also to lower costs.
Yeah, and I think so. I agree, and it's one of those things where that's flexibility, the ability to customize solutions, not to every differently for every customer maybe, but it is a kind of a hallmark, really, I think, of regional carriers, and it's a differentiating factor. And it's, really compared to the national carriers, UPS and FedEx, it's really just part of it is the math. The fact that there's the high amount of network and fixed costs on a national carrier side with this really large network, they can make some customization and changes with a limited number of customers, and usually there's the largest ones who have a lot of volume that can influence that. Everybody else really has to fit within a standard process, which again on the UPS and FedEx side makes sense because they have to manage the network in a way that it's efficient and keeps costs, I guess, manageable. So they're not able to customize it, for as many customers, and that should be, I think, a way that regional carriers, stand out and are differentiated from national carriers.
Awesome. I think we've covered a ton of ground. I appreciate both your perspectives. We'll get you out of here on this. This fireside chat is called Better Yet. So Nate, I'll start with you. What are you most optimistic about in the parcel space as you think of maybe the balance of this year?
So optimistic. It's interesting because there's a lot of uncertainty, I think, in the market. What I would say is that thinking from a retailer standpoint is, yes, there's a lot of focus on managing expense, as there should be, but like we talked almost this entire chat here, there are many more options than there have been in the past. There's much more access to those options. It enables flexibility. It enables a retailer to be very specific in designing and taking control of their parcel program. And so what I would say is, I'm optimistic or excited about the fact that even in a difficult economic environment, retailers can still be focusing on improving the delivery experience through a lot of the things we've talked about today. It doesn't have to increase expense necessarily. It won't always save you 20%, but there's sometimes the opportunity to do that too. And so I think really just advising a lot of package shippers not to kind of be too conservative and just hunker down and kind of ride it out and try to reduce expense, but really maintain or create that focus on taking control of your program, even in a difficult environment like this.
I think that's great. I think that makes a lot of sense, Nate. One of the things that I would say here about what excites me is, yeah, there's a lot of competition, no doubt, absolutely. I think that there's also, a softening economy. There's not as much volume out there. And so from my standpoint is, what can Better Trucks do to help our clients? Maybe it's unique for every client that we have. What can we do for other clients that we're not working with today, where we can come in and help them solve their issues? And maybe that's on the parcel side of the house. Maybe that's, further up the supply chain as well. Utilizing our trucks, utilizing our team to help them. And so, even if there's not a cost savings on the parcel side, which I highly doubt with, using, Better Trucks, maybe we do some, store replenishment work as well. Maybe we do some freight movement and rebalancing work as well when we come to your facility to pick up, all of your product. And so, from my standpoint, it's kind of thinking about where there's an ability to optimize, where there's opportunity to kind of think outside the box about ways to solve problems is really what excites me most about, this year and going forward in our industry.
Well, phenomenal. I really appreciate both your time, some great insights, massive opportunities in the market, and certainly some things to keep an eye on as we head further into this year. So very much appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. We'll catch you on the next episode of Better Yet.